Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep week 58 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, after spending 2 of the last 3 series, some 16 weeks in total, in Humphrey Carpenter's book, The Inklings, it's time to go back to the revised and expanded letters volume. Now, we'll pick up after the publication of The Lord of the Rings, and this time, I'm not going to be looking exclusively at new letters. Since I'll be covering ground that I've not touched on in any of the Tolkien Tuesdays before, I'll be looking at letters that were in the original version of the letters collection, as well as ones only available in the revised and expanded edition. Now, after wrapping up with letter 206 the last time we looked at this, we're going to move just ahead to letter 207 as we begin to get a closer look at Tolkien's views on adaptation in general and the Zimmerman treatment of a possible film. Now, we looked at a few of the letters about this later in Series 6, but those were earlier in the process. Now, today's letter, number 207, was written in April 1958 to Rainer Unwin at Allen & Unwin, his longtime publisher. Unwin had sent Tolkien a synopsis of a proposed film written by Morton Zimmerman, and Tolkien promises to look over the storyline. He admits being entirely ignorant of the process of producing an animated picture from a book, and of the jargon connected with it. This is partly because he's wondering if the document he's looking at is just guidance for the people making the film or actual dialogue. And here's what he writes. It is not necessary or advisable for me to waste time on mere expressions if these are simply directions to picture producers. But this document as it stands is sufficient to give me grave anxiety about the actual dialogue that, I suppose, will be used. I should say Zimmerman, the constructor of this storyline, is quite incapable of excerpting or adapting the spoken words of the book. He is hasty, insensitive, and impertinent. Don't beat around the bush, Professor. Tell us what you really think. It does make me wonder what Tolkien would think of dialogue specifically in all the various adaptations. Now, I know you're probably thinking about Rings of Power, but the Jackson films for Lord of the Rings, the Jackson Hobbit films, the Bakshi Lord of the Rings, Rankin and Bass's Hobbit, Return of the King, all of those. I just got to wonder what he would think. But he doesn't just accuse Zimmerman of being hasty, insensitive, and impertinent. No, why stop there? Tolkien argues that Zimmerman does not read books. It seems to me evident that he has skimmed through The Lord of the Rings at a great pace, and then constructed his storyline from partly confused memories, and with the minimum of references back to the original. As evidence, he points to Zimmerman always getting Boromir's name wrong, calling him Boromir, or how Zimmerman turns Radagast into an eagle. Tolkien complains that the introduction of characters and the indications of what they are to say have little or no reference to the book. He says that he feels very unhappy about the extreme silliness and incompetence of Zimmerman, and his complete lack of respect for the original. It seems willfully wrong without discernible technical reasons at nearly every point. End quote. Still, even with all those complaints, reality forces his hand. Tolkien acknowledges his immediate concern. I need, and shall soon need very much indeed, money. Plus, he recognizes that Unwin has a stake in all this as well, and Tolkien says he's aware of his rights and interests, so that I shall endeavor to restrain myself and avoid all avoidable offense. I love how many outs he gives himself. I shall endeavor to do this, and to avoid specifically avoidable offense. In other words, well, that offense wasn't avoidable, so I had to, and though I endeavored to restrain myself, I wasn't entirely successful. I am all here for it. Now, we're going to have a lot more to say about this next week when we reach the infamous letter 210 that he wrote to Zimmerman directly later in 1958. But A, that letter is far too long to get into now. It may actually take 2 episodes to look through. And B, we've got enough time to look at letter 208 instead. Now, this letter is not related at all to adaptations, but those creating adaptations would be wise to read it. Now, he's writing to a Kees Aubother from Voorhoeve en Dietrich in Rotterdam. That's the bookstore that he went to. Take a look back at letters 205A and B. They were where he accepted an invitation to speak at an event in Rotterdam and then thanked them for bringing him out there. In letter 206, he told Rainer Unwin of the success of the event. We looked at that at the end of the series a few times back. And here he is a week or two later responding to a letter from Aubother asking about the message of The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien writes that he has none, really, if by that is meant the conscious purpose in writing The Lord of the Rings of preaching or of delivering myself of a vision of truth specially revealed to me. No, instead he says that his main purpose was to write an exciting story in an atmosphere and background such as I find personally attractive. This tracks with what we read in the foreword to the second edition, where Tolkien writes, "The Lord of the Rings has been read by many people since it finally appeared in print, and I should like to say something here with reference to the many opinions or guesses that I have received or have read concerning the motives and meaning of the tale. The prime motive was the desire of a tale teller to try his hand at a really long story that would hold the attention of readers, amuse them, delight them, and at times maybe excite them or deeply move them. And then later, as for any inner meaning or message, it has, in the intention of the author, none." Still, Tolkien readily admits that in writing a story like this, it's impossible to avoid taking up one's own taste, ideas, and beliefs. Interestingly, in the letter, he says that it is only in reading the work myself with criticisms in mind that I become aware of the dominance of the theme of death. It's a huge theme. Tolkien's telling us here that he didn't even realize just how dominant that theme was until he read the work with criticism of it in mind. Now, of course, that leads him to talk about how death is viewed in Middle-earth, or how he thinks it ought to be viewed. He writes, "Death is not an enemy. I said, or meant to say, that the message was the hideous peril of confusing true immortality with limitless serial longevity, freedom from time and clinging to time." Such a fascinating way of comparing the truth of men, right? Freedom from time, true immortality, and the tendency of elves clinging to time, that serial longevity. Now he adds that the confusion is the work of the enemy and one of the chief causes of human disaster. See, for example, Numenor. Finally, Tolkien points out how the elves view human mortality. The elves call death the gift of God to men. Their temptation is different, towards a fainéant melancholy, burdened with memory, leading to an attempt to halt time. And we've talked about that before. The elvish tendency to preserve can lead them too far, at least farther than is wise. For now, though, that wraps it up for this week's Tolkien Tuesday. Be sure to join me again next week for more letters from Tolkien as we dive into letter number 210 to Zimmerman. In the meantime, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can join the Content Council and be a part of deciding what I talk about. You also can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a bonus episode every week, and more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.